Hey guys, earlier today a friend stopped by with a set that he had just bought off of Craigslist. It's a Philco Predicta holiday set with a 21-inch picture tube. These have a reputation for failing prematurely. The 17-inch ones like this are fairly reliable, but not so much the 21-inch sets. These use really shallow picture tubes, 110-degree deflection, and the technology wasn't quite perfected. They were really kind of pushing the limits of what was possible. So the first thing we wanted to do was see if the picture tube was any good. Unfortunately, I did not have the correct adapter for my Sencor CR70, so I pulled out my old B&K 440 and found the picture tube on here. It is the 21 EAP4, and you notice the heater voltage 2.34 volts. You got to be careful with these old Predicta sets. They quite often use either 2.34 or 2.68 volts on the picture tube. Hook it up to 6.3 and you just blow it right out. Now, I do have the adapter for this tester, and I hooked it up, and the filament did glow, but we got nothing. The neon lights didn't light up, no meter deflection whatsoever. Let it sit for probably a good half hour, still essentially no readings. So I figured, oh well, get another bad Predicta picture tube, maybe we can part the set out, whatever. But, or I could try rejuvenating it. But before I wanted to mess with any of that, I thought I'd give one more shot of using my Sencor. So I went online and found the pinout for the 21 EAP4, and here it is. Heater or filament, G2, G1, G4, then another G2. These are both connected to the same element and the cathode. G4 is used for the electrostatic focus. All you really need to test the emissions is the heater, cathode, G1, G2. Well, I do have the universal adapter for my Sencor. So I got my clip leads here for the heater and the cathode and G1, G2 and hooked them all up. Same problem, nothing. I mean, the filament would glow a little bit, but no emissions, no cutoff control, but no shorts indicated either. So then I got to thinking, well, maybe I could try the rejuvenate feature. But before I do that, I better ask online, take some photos, and make sure I'm not missing something. So I posted to Video Karma, explained what I was trying to do, and I got some great suggestions back from member Dave WM, I think, or Dave VM. So first off, make sure I got these clip leads hooked up right, and I do. Secondly, try hooking it into a working set. Well, I don't have a working Predicta set that uses a picture tube like this, and even if I did, little tough to hook it up. Maybe you could take the other set and put it back to back and pop the cover off the other set and try to take this connector and twist it around and plug it in. But there's also a high voltage wire that snakes up through the neck of the picture tube here and connects over to around here. Taking these clamshells apart is not easy, not fun. These are made out of plastic and held on with this band here, and over the years and decades the plastic can deform a little bit, and it can be kind of tough to get these screws out and the plate off and these clamshells apart, and then later on you have to put it back together, so I don't want to mess with that either. And his final thought was, you know, it's just possible that this picture tube has been rebuilt and they used a 6.3 filament electron gun rather than the original 2.35 volt. Well, according to the data sheet, this filament should draw 600 milliamps. So I put an ammeter in series with the filament clip And what do you know, I was only drawing like 150 milliamps. So very carefully, nervously, started increasing the filament voltage. And I started going through the ranges of 2, 3, 4, 5 as the current slowly climbed. And lo and behold, when I finally got into the 6 range, around 6.3 volts on the filament, we got 600 milliamps. And we now have emission. Not fantastic. It's in between the good and the bad range, but it's a heck of a lot better than 0 and should be good enough to produce a picture. This is the first time I've encountered something quite like this. My other Predicta sets, the Princess and the Siesta, do have 2.68 filament voltage picture tubes. However, I did buy a replacement from an outfit called VDC that was designed and built to run on 6.3 volts. So I was certainly aware that there are 6.3 volt versions of this picture tube, of the 17-inch picture tube. Did not know the same might apply to the 21-inch picture tube. So if you ever encounter one of these and test it, and it seems things seem really weak, no emissions, that's something worth checking out. It just might be that it's been replaced with one that runs on 6.3 volts. As for the rest of the set, I have no idea. Just dropped it off a couple hours ago. Haven't opened the back, know nothing about it. Other than the channel knob is missing. I was just poking around the set a little bit more, and looky what I found printed on the CRT. It sure looks like a 6V to me, and I bet that stands for 6 volts, so if I had noticed that, I might have saved myself a little bit of time. It turns out this set's owner would like to have it restored, and I'm going to be placing an order with Mauser for some parts for some other various projects, so I figured why not order some parts for this guy too, even though I have a few other projects to finish first. Now I know the picture tube is good, but I have not opened this set up yet, so I think that's the next logical step, because if there's some critical component that's completely fried, like the Flyback, I'm going to have to hold off on restoring this until I can track down some sort of replacement. Just like the picture tube, the Flybacks on these are somewhat unreliable too, and replacements, or I should say exact replacements, just don't exist. Sure, they were made back in the day, but because there's such a demand for these sets, I think those supplies dried up a long time ago. So the best you can do these days is either try to find a parts set that does have a good Flyback, or substitute one that's close enough. So let's see what's inside. This set does have the original back. It's held on with some 1/4-inch nuts. So I'm going to turn the set around and get a wrench, and let's take a look inside. I misspoke a moment ago. They're actually Phillips screws and not 1/4-inch nuts. This cabinet's not in the greatest shape. It seems like they used some type of photo finish on top, and it's flaking off in the areas. Some of the top is metal that's painted to look like wood, and the rest seems to be this faux finish. Also, the channel knob is missing. But other than that, looks to be in decent condition. Oh, and of course the antenna's gone, but that's very commonly the case. There's actually an outfit that makes reproduction backs for these sets. You can get them in various colors. You won't get the original printing though. just a piece of masonite. Still has the original power cord, minus the end. There we go. Oh, there's a tube shard in the back. Alright. I have never worked on one of these Holidays models before. I do have a Princess and a Siesta. Siesta is more or less working after I repaired a tube, I replaced a tube on it. I've got a video on it on my channel elsewhere, and my Princess does not work. I poked around with it a little bit. I did a little recapping on it. It still needs more work. I'll get back to it one of these days. But first up, I'm going to work on this guy. Alright. Well, at first blush, I don't see anything horrible. All the parts seem to be present and accounted for. I gotta do a little bit of figuring to see how to actually get this chassis out. Well, that was easier than I expected. They actually tell you right here how to pull the chassis. You remove all the knobs and then simply remove these two nuts and it slides out. Let's see, that was the speaker, which is now disconnected. I'll have to figure out where that plugs back in. And this is the cable going up to the picture tube, which is a plug, several plugs. Let's see, high voltage lead. Let's see how that comes out. Yikes. Well, I'm not entirely sure. Oh, this must have been the fusistor, which has just exploded. So somebody must have tried plugging this set in. That's this guy right here. That's one half of it. It would have plugged in right across here. I've got an intact one. I'll show you guys what they look like. Here's what that fuse resistor would have looked like originally, also known as fusistors. Hopefully it did its job and blew up before anything in the circuit was damaged. I'm trying to figure out how to disconnect that high voltage lead, but I don't see where it comes out. I'm sure it does somehow, unless somebody replaces with a solid wire, because why would you have all the cables on plugs except for this one wire? Because with this attached, I can only get the chassis out this far. But at least that's enough so we can take a look at it. There's the flyback. Actually, does not look bad. Usually this coating is far more deteriorated. So this may have been replaced at some time. Might be slightly newer than the rest of the set. I've got the schematic and they show the resistance readings between these lugs, so I can test it out fairly easily. So we got the tuner, the IF stages, and then the sweep and sound circuits. I do not see any obvious repairs. Still got all the original bumblebee caps. All those gotta go. And then there are these lovely devices. called couplates. What those are is sort of an early hybrid module. So these lumps in here, those are actually resistors and capacitors. Quite often those drift out of tolerance or go bad entirely. And the only way to replace those is to fabricate your own from scratch using like a little piece of circuit board. Like we got 1, 2, 3, 4 at least. And also some of these guys which look like coils, and maybe there's a capacitor in there inside of a little plastic assembly. Now you may have heard me mention, or others mention, what a bitch these are to work on. Simple reason is this. This is a circuit board. So all the solder connections for these are underneath. Oh, you'd think, well, okay, I'll just flip this over and work on it from the other side. Well, you can to some extent, but I know at least on some of the other models, the other side of the circuit board is covered by a sheet of metal, so you can't get to it. So you need to unmount the circuit board. Unfortunately, in order to do that, you have to disconnect all these wires. There's posts all around the perimeter of these circuit boards with little wires wrapped onto them. They're not plugs, they're not sockets. So to get the board out, you have to unwrap all these wires, making careful note of what went where. And then to test out your repairs, you have to hook it all back up. If something's still not right, you got to pull it out again and again and again until you get the set working. So generally what people do is if they're going to remove the circuit board, you replace everything and you check everything thoroughly. Whether the couplates are still good or not, rebuild them anyways. Replace every capacitor, double check every resistor. Another notorious problem with these sets are the crappy tube sockets they would use. Quite often from the heating over the lifetime of the set's operation, they develop cracks, or from wiggling the tubes in and out, they crack. You get cold solder joints, so that's definitely something to check. We'll say though, this does actually appear to be somewhat easier to work on than the 17-inch models I've got. And if I reach under here, I don't feel any metal covering that. So I might not have to remove these boards after all. But first thing I gotta do is figure out how to get this high voltage wire disconnected so I can flip this chassis over and we get a better look at what's going on. I did a little research online and I discovered that the trick to getting the high voltage lead off is to carefully remove the high voltage rectifier tube and then carefully work loose the red wire there. It actually has a plug on the end of it that fits down into the socket down there. So with that removed, slide that out. Now the chassis is completely free for removal. Alright, now we can really get a good look at this set. The cover on the high voltage cage is just this piece of metal held on by a copper strap on one side. There's no screws or anything, it's just held in by friction. So let's see what's underneath. Yeah, okay. When I was reaching around underneath and thought that I was touching the bottom of the circuit board, I most definitely was not. What I was feeling was just some other parts. So, as you can see, there's a circuit board on the other side right here. You can't get to it. It is possible to clip off the leads from the top and make little pigtails on the new part and solder them on, but I'm going to go and do the full-blown job and remove the circuit board and all the rest of it, because I do want to. Well, one, I've never done it before, so I figure here's my chance. And two, after all the problems I've heard about with bad sockets and circuit board traces and cold solder joints and all, I'm just gonna remove the whole thing and thoroughly check it all. This is a transformerless set, series wired tube filament, so no power transformer. Transformers you do see, I believe one of them is a filter choke, one is a vertical output transformer, and I think one is a vertical oscillator transformer. There's electrolytic caps, 2 down below, 1 up on top. This resistor is fairly critical from what I saw in the schematic. It's part of the series filament circuit. The tubes don't quite add up to 120 volts, so in series with that you got the fusistor, you got this tapped guy, and a pilot light. It's a little tough to see, but up in here we've got a fusible resistor, that's blew up. We've got a thermistor, 400 ohm cold, 11 ohm hot. That provides a soft startup. When it sets cold, less current will flow, and as the set warms up, this resistance drops and the tubes warm up further. There's the pilot light, and this thing with arrows here, the 13 ohm, the 8 ohm, 17 ohm, that's this guy. And it's one of those horrible sand resistors. You can already see the green corrosion starting, so I'll have to probably use 3 discrete wire wound resistors to replace that. That's got to be a replacement. Nice of them to retain what I believe is the original paper cover. That's the filter cap, or I shouldn't say filter cap, that's the capacitor right off the filter line that forms part of the voltage doubler. So, got a little hard to see on this cramped schematic, but it's that guy right there. Then they have a couple silicon rectifiers forming a voltage doubler. And that FC 1 Henry choke, that's that big transformer down here. That guy there, I'm pretty sure. Alright, so this actually looks to be in decent condition other than that exploded fusistor. It's not full of hacks, I don't see any parts missing or anything like that. So what I'm going to attempt to do now is test that flyback. Let me see if I can figure out which leads correspond to the schematic, get an ohm meter, and see what values I read. I printed out a schematic from the Sam's service info. I think it's a bit easier to read than the one that I was referring to a moment ago. The first resistance I want to test is the easiest one. It's from the plate cap on the rectifier to the plate cap on the horizontal output tube. Should be 385 ohms. So there's one plate cap there, and the other one is a very short, stiff wire going right into the flyback, so be very careful, you don't want to break that off. And I have 375 ohms, which I'd say is close enough. My big fear was that it would measure open. Now the other ones aren't quite so easy to measure. Unless having it hooked into the circuitry won't affect the readings much. So let's see if I can figure out where those leads 4, 3, and B are on this thing. I did a little more checking on the flyback, and it all seems to check out fine. So I think we're good to go with that. Also notice that when I pulled this plate cap off, I really pulled it off. Rip the cap right off the top of the tube. Just as well though, because this tube looks really fried, so no doubt I'll be replacing it. I then removed the cover from the IF stages. Just a few sheet metal nuts holding that on. So here's the other little circuit board in this set. No paper caps though. And also none of those cup plates that I can see. So I think what I'll do is focus on this board and the various filter caps and so on, and try running the set without touching this at all. If there are any performance problems, then I'll worry about tackling this. So that's good enough for me to go ahead and order up some parts for this. Once they come in and I finish off a few other projects, start tackling this guy. One last thing I want to do while I've got this chassis pulled out is to clean it up, because it is filthy. While I'm doing so, I can also check for any more damage. So you see there's actually color underneath all this grime. So I'm using a nice soft brush, and I'll use a little bit of compressed air. And if needed, I will use some Q-tips dampened with a little bit of general purpose cleaner. I use some 409, some mineral spirits, a bunch of Q-tips, a brush, some compressed air, and it's cleaning up pretty well. Also pulled all the tubes out so I can inspect the sockets rather, and they look to be in pretty good shape. What sometimes happens is, from the tubes being rocked back and forth when they're removed and reinserted, these little bits of metal break here, but these are all intact except for this guy. I'm familiar with this type of socket on these Predictas, but I hadn't seen this type before. It looks like, it used to look, well, like this, but the whole top section here is broken away, or partially broken away. Probably good enough to use in a pinch, but I'll try to replace it if I can find one. IF strip looks to be in pretty good shape too. In fact, the only other thing I found that looked the least bit questionable is underneath, over here, a couple leads sticking out that look like they used to go to something that might have exploded. Maybe it was another capacitor. Or I should say maybe it was like that fusistor on the other side that had blown up. I'll have to pull out the service info and see if I can figure it out. So I went ahead and placed an order with Mauser, and the parts should be here by the end of the week. In the meantime, I'm going to button this set back up and continue on with other projects, but before too long, I should get around to this set. I think it should be a pretty interesting project. That's all for now.